All right, perfect. All right, so for introductions here, so Thomas Healy, founder and CEO of Hyliion. And then
I'm Jon Panzer, Chief Financial Officer.
Sure. All right, so little background on us. So our goal is to be the most negative company out there, and with that, the whole focus is reducing emissions, improving climate change. As I think all of you are aware, big diesel semi trucks, they are a huge contributor to our climate change problems. And our goal is we want to take these trucks and move them over to electrification. Now, if any of you have followed electrified trucking or know trucks, that is an extremely difficult feat. This is probably one of the hardest industries to electrify. If you think about an 80,000-pound truck, like the one that you saw accelerating in that video, or trucks that can be weighed up to 80,000 pounds, the amount of batteries you need, the range that these trucks are traveling on a daily basis, it's a difficult problem. But with that, as you can see from the bottom of this slide, there's huge opportunities here in terms of climate change and emission reductions that are ahead of us. So with that, I want to start off with just sharing a little bit about kind of how we see the landscape evolving in the trucking space. And I think we're at a point today where there's no doubt the industry is going to shift to electric. There's so much momentum and a push towards this. Fleets want it. I think if you actually go talk to these fleet operators years ago, they were kind of questioning whether electric was going to happen. Now they're bought in and believe it will happen. But it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. So what we see is local delivery, short haul, final mile. That's going to go BEV plug-in. But then the long haul space, you're really going to need a range extender vehicle. You're going to need something that produces the electricity on board the truck and charges the batteries as you drive. So our focus is that range extender space. And the euphoria solution that's often talked about is hydrogen fuel cell. And while we believe that that is the right roadmap, hydrogen is the fuel of the future, we believe that we're still a very long ways away from making that a reality. And we'll go into some slides on this, but you think about like the infrastructure that's out there, it's at its infancy. The cost of hydrogen is big. The emissions benefits today are actually not that great from hydrogen, unless it's green hydrogen. So we'll dive into all that, but our approach is we start with natural gas, specifically renewable natural gas on board the trucks, and then we evolve into utilizing hydrogen if and when the time is right. So a little background on the company. You saw our headquarters through the video. We've got a little over 200 employees now. We're located in Austin, Texas, and we took the company public back in late 2020. And with that, we closed out last quarter with about $500 million of capital on our balance sheet. And I think one thing just to note, and Jon can cover this in more detail, but there are some long-term investments. So okay, that brings us to the 500 million number. But with that, the focus is, as we bring these electric solutions to fleets, there's three key areas that they care about. And this is going to be the theme throughout this presentation and that you're going to see continue to come up. And it's, they want to reduce their emissions. They also need to focus on costs and ideally pull forward a lower operating cost solution, as well as they want to leverage existing infrastructure. They don't want to go spend tens of millions of dollars setting up new infrastructure out there. So those are the three goals that as we look to solve this problem of shifting to electric, that we're focusing on being able to address these three key things. So with that, a little background on the technology, the products that we're bringing to market. So the first is our hybrid electric solution. This is something that we're actually shipping to fleets already today. And it's an add-on or bolt-on that can go on both new and existing trucks. And as you can see from the picture, we replaced the rearmost axle with an E-axle and then mount a battery pack to the frame rail. Effectively, it's a large Toyota Prius. It's probably the easiest way to think about it. Then on the right-hand side is our flagship product, our Hypertruck ERX, which is a fully electric drive vehicle, but it uses an onboard generator to charge the batteries. The other key thing to note on this slide is we don't make the trucks. We're a powertrain company. So when you think about the key truck manufacturers in the US that are listed on the bottom of the screen, we leverage and work with them to build the chassis, and then we install our powertrain system on it. So on our hybrid product, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on this. So we've actually installed this on all the major truck OEMs, this product already. And it's really a step into electric. It's a way for kind of fleets to get their feet wet, but it's not the end all be all solution. We see that as being more the Hypertruck ERX. And to bring this technology to market, as mentioned before, since we're not building the truck, we decided the right approach was let's work with one OEM to get started, and then we'll expand to others as we move forward. So to launch, we're going to be working with Peterbilt, and so we'll be delivering Peterbilt's trucks with the Hyliion powertrain in it to fleets. So some of the stats around this. So when you think about operating costs, it's lower than diesel. We're going to go into that in a few slides of its the cost of natural gas, renewable natural gas is significantly less than diesel. The truck can go 1,000 miles in between fuel ups, which if you think about like a conventional electric truck, it's nowhere near that range. I mean, fleets are experiencing 100, maybe 200 miles of range out of BEV plug-in trucks. So 1,000 miles of range is a game changer. It's more like the range of what a diesel has, but it also has the capabilities of driving 75 miles just on the battery pack. And then from a performance standpoint, you saw this in that video as well, the horsepower, the torque, it pulls away from a diesel truck. The stat that always fascinated me was if you go from 0 to 15 miles an hour in a diesel truck, you're going to shift usually 6 times just to get to 15 miles an hour. So when you think about an electric truck, it's only 2 gears, you get instant torque, instant acceleration, and drivers love that aspect of it. So what it kind of led in with was, well, there's the future of hydrogen, right? Well, what we've positioned ourselves with is that we can start with a natural gas range extender vehicle today and then evolve into a hydrogen solution when the time is right. So our first product that we're delivering, and the Hypertruck ERX goes into production in late 23, or I should say the first variant of the Hypertruck that we'll be delivering, and that is a natural gas range extender solution. Then phase 2 is a fuel agnostic generator, which we recently just acquired out of GE. We're calling this the Hypertruck Carno. And then the third phase is the Hypertruck fuel cell. And that's where it'd be a purely hydrogen-based vehicle. So the key thing to note here is most of the powertrain stays the same along this evolution. The only thing that changes is the genset under the hood and then what fuel you're going to be utilizing. So before kind of putting some of those stats out there around, the 3 key things I mentioned in the lead-in, also want to talk about kind of the government incentive and push to move to electric. So there's 3 things to look at. There's CARB ACF, ACT, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. So ACT is a mandate on the OEMs that they're going to have to be shipping vehicles that qualify for ZEV credits. ACF is a mandate on the fleets in order for them to adopt vehicles that are attaining ZEV credits. And then the Inflation Reduction Act is more of an incentive. And so in all these, the first 2, we qualify for ZEV credits. And then in the third bucket, fleets that are adopting our solution will get a $40,000 tax credit per truck because the government is pushing fleets to move to electrification. So the reason we put all this up is one is there's huge government support for what we're doing, but the great thing is that the government is embracing the path that we're on. So there was often questions that we get about, well, is the government really going to be supportive of a natural gas range extender electric vehicle? And the answer is yes. The mandates are showing that. All right, so now back to those 3 key things. And we're just going to throw a bunch of stats out here, which I think coming out of this section, people usually say, yeah, well, I fully understand why this is the right path to go for long haul trucking. So cost, infrastructure, and emissions. So let's first take a look at what a journey would look like if you used a diesel truck versus a hydrogen, a BEV versus a Hypertruck ERX. So the first is just fuel cost. As you can see, we come in substantially less than diesel, as well as much less than hydrogen and even BEV plug-in. From an emissions standpoint, we have the capabilities of going net carbon negative, which I'll cover in a couple of slides here. From a number of stops standpoint, it goes back to that we have the fact that we have 1,000 miles of range. So along this journey, you would only need to stop once in order to refuel. And then, the time of refueling is only 15 minutes. And along that journey, you would pass 48 stations that you could refuel at, versus if you look at hydrogen and BEV, I think the stats, and we'll cover them in a slide here, but there's only like 3 or 4 stations out there for BEV and for hydrogen. So we still got a long ways to go in that one. All right, so here are the fun stats. So cost of renewable natural gas at a station is about $1 per gallon. Compare that to diesel, you're about at $5 a gallon. Hydrogen is still a very expensive fuel, and even grid electricity only comes in slightly below the cost of a diesel gallon. So emissions, the graph on the left shows both a diesel truck, which this is looking at CI scores, so carbon intensity scores of the fuels. Diesel truck is about a 100 CI score. When you look at hydrogen, a lot of hydrogen is actually more pollutive than diesel. Reason for that is they use a process called steam methane reforming, which is not a clean process. Now, you can get down to 0 if you use electrolysis, but I think the stat is like less than 10% of the hydrogen made in the US or utilized in the US is actually coming from electrolysis today. Then you got grid electricity, which can range anywhere from getting down to 0 if you're going to use purely wind, solar, or hydro. But that's not the primary source of where most of our electricity comes from. You can range upwards of in the 80s of grid electricity. And then with natural gas, in renewable natural gas, you have this ability to go net carbon negative or below 0. And for anyone who's new to the RNG story or biogas story, it's a process of capturing emissions coming off of landfills, dairy farms, wastewater treatment plants, and then pushing that into the pipelines in order to use that as fuel on board the vehicle. So you're basically using pollution to drive the truck. So a lot of benefits there from an emissions standpoint. And then lastly, the infrastructure. So I mentioned this before, hydrogen and grid electric infrastructure is just getting started for over-the-road semi-trucks versus with RNG, there's already almost, or CNG RNG, there's already almost 700 public stations already out there. All right, and then I'm going to just close with a couple of slides on Carno. So I mentioned this is going to be the fuel agnostics technology that we're utilizing. So this was an acquisition we just recently made out of GE, and it is a linear generator heat engine technology where we can bring in various fuel sources, convert them into electricity, and do it at a much higher efficiency, a much lower emissions, and have that ability to use over 20 different fuel types. So on the fuel side of things, here's a list of some of the opportunities. So anywhere from hydrogen to natural gas, you can even use things like ammonia or propane or even conventional fuels in this generator. And then from an efficiency standpoint, we're seeing about we're expecting a 20% increase in efficiency over a standard internal combustion engine vehicle. And this comparison on the left here was done utilizing hydrogen. So one of the interesting stats is we're actually expecting the Carno generator will be more efficient than even a fuel cell. And then lastly, we see this as a technology that not only is going to be applicable to trucks, but we can also use it in other applications as well. One of the pain points that we hear on a day in and day out basis from fleets is they're looking at adopting BEV for that short haul space, but the grid can't support the charging needs. So you could actually deploy Carno generators at a location that could feed the electricity to the chargers to keep your electric vehicles up and on the road, and do it at a cost that is even less than average electricity costs out of the grid. All right, so that's our overview. As a recap from a company standpoint, we're sitting here today, a robust cash position. We closed out Q2 with $500 million of cash on the balance sheet. We're doing an asset light model. Jon can cover this in more detail if anyone has questions on it, but our goal is not go set up big manufacturing plants. We're leveraging existing truck OEMs. We're using the chassis they already make. Fleets already love them. And we're deploying our powertrain in those vehicles. And then there's tremendous market demand. Any fleet you go talk to, they're trying to figure out what their ESG initiative is going to be, how they're going to make this shift to electrification. And the great news is all of them want to make this shift. They're just trying to figure out how right now.
Great, Thomas. Appreciate the overview, and I think we're gonna roll the virtual truck tour now.
So we're sitting in one of the Hypertruck ERX early development vehicles. As you can see from inside the cab, it looks very similar to a conventional diesel truck. This is actually one of the benefits of Hyliion is it's simple for a driver to be able to jump in and know how to drive this truck. So with that, we'll get started. So just like in a diesel, you got to release your parking brakes. You shift it into drive. This now engages the E-axles so we can pull forward, and we'll go hit the road. We'll go ahead and accelerate here. We're doing a little bit of an uphill, as well as we've got a heavy load behind us here. But you're going to see, even with those two factors of kind of worst case situation, uphill and loaded, we're still going to be merging onto the highway at highway speeds. And this is very different than a standard diesel. Normally, a diesel truck will take about usually around 60 seconds to actually get up to highway speeds, versus right now we're already going about the same speed as traffic here. We're going about 60, and we're able to merge in no problem. And this is another big benefit we've heard from drivers, because usually they suffer from trying to get onto the highway. They're going a lot slower than others. People are having to move out of lanes to let them in. With this, we're merging in more like how a passenger car would. So the next thing I want to showcase is the generator actually kicking on. So you may not have even noticed, but during that time when we were coming onto the highway, the generator actually kicked on. Right now it's in a warm-up mode, and then here in a few seconds you'll actually see the RPMs of the natural gas engine under the hood pick up. It just went ahead and did it right there. And now we're actually starting to charge the battery pack. So you can see we're putting about 220 horsepower of electricity back into the battery pack to charge it up. And that's going to act as a trickle charge. So our batteries will stop depleting, and now they're going to actually start gradually charging as we're going down the highway. And the goal is that the generator will be producing a little bit more electricity than what you need for standard vehicle operation. And so that way, you're just going to start charging the batteries ever so slightly. But from a driver's standpoint, as you go to hit an uphill like we're about to right now, it will pull the power both out of the generator as well as any additional power needed. It'll pull out of the battery pack. And then conversely, if we're going downhill, it will actually use the generator to charge the batteries while we're also doing regen braking and putting electricity back into the battery pack through the E-axles as well. So truly set up as a seamless system here from a driver's standpoint. As you saw, I didn't even need to turn the generator on. And then when the batteries start getting a little bit more full here, the generator will automatically kick off on its own and we'll go back into EV driving. And then as someone just pulled in ahead of me, let off the gas, and we were able to capture all of that energy back into the battery pack through that regen braking. So next, we want to showcase just how quiet this vehicle is. So normally, diesel trucks are extremely loud when you're going to accelerate and bringing them up through the gears to get it up to speed. You can see I just went full throttle in the truck, and so as you can see on the screen, we did a comparison of the decibel level inside of the Hypertruck ERX driving on EV mode as we go to accelerate, compared to a diesel truck and its acceleration with the same amount of cargo behind in the trailer, and how noisy that is. So another big feature that we hear from drivers all the time as to what they're really looking forward to when they get behind the wheel of this semi. Right now we're driving in bumper to bumper traffic, and one of the things that the truck has done is gone into EV mode. So the generator is no longer turned on. It's off. It's quiet in here, and we're running just on the battery pack. So a few benefits that this creates. One is, there's actually a big diesel truck next to us here. And even though we're stopped in bumper to bumper traffic, that truck's still running. It's still consuming diesel fuel. And the driver can't turn the truck off right now. So unlike our system where we're just on the batteries, we're not consuming any fuel right now. We're not creating any pollution. We're running just on EV. And we see that this is going to be a huge savings in fuel consumption because you don't have that engine just sitting there idling, as well as it's going to be a big benefit from an emissions standpoint. So another benefit of EV only mode is we actually plan on having geozone capability. So, if you look at a warehouse or you look at going into city limits, we can actually top off the battery pack before you approach those areas. And then you can drive just in EV mode when you're in those certain designated spaces. Now, what this allows for is you're going to have zero tailpipe pollution. You're going to have very little noise pollution as well, right? Think about a diesel semi truck driving by your house. It's loud. It creates a lot of noise. This truck doesn't, right? And so those are going to be some benefits that we see of the EV only mode. So as we're heading back to the headquarters here, I just want to conclude with just sharing a little bit about what we've heard from drivers and fleets that we've had come in and actually take these vehicles for a spin. And honestly, the feedback has been fantastic. Drivers love it. They get in and instantly realize how big of an improvement there is over a standard diesel. The quiet aspect of the truck, the low vibration, and then obviously the instant acceleration. That's what really stands out to people. So that's what we're hearing from fleets, and we can't wait to get more of these deployed in fleet operations.
Great. So we have about 11 minutes for Q&A. If the audience has questions, please feel free to raise your hand and get involved. I'm going to kick it off. I have a bunch of questions, but Thomas, if we could just talk about your roadmap to commercialization for the Hypertruck ERX, maybe just remind us of some of the future major milestones that's on that on that roadmap as we're looking out to I think the end of 2023 is the current target.
Absolutely. So as you saw from the video, the trucks are out on the road. They're already working. We're putting testing and validation miles on them right now. And we also just kicked off controlled fleet trials, which means we're actually putting the trucks in deployment within fleet's operations so that they get to experience it firsthand as well. So where we sit today is as we close at the end of this year and go into next year, we'll continue to expand the number of fleet trials we're doing. And then we'll go through CARB, EPA, and NHTSA certification in the earlier parts of next year. And then that puts us on track to be able to launch production of the Hypertruck ERX in late 23. So that's the roadmap to get us to the start of production. And we're pleased to say that where we stand today is we've already got the first 200 production slots already booked with fleets. Some of the large fleets here in the US are part of that. And then we have a backlog of an additional 2,000 reservations and interest from fleets beyond that as well. So we're heads down working on executing towards getting those first 200 trucks out there.
And maybe if you could provide us, a couple, if possible, the names of the fleets that are currently have an ERX that they're operating and testing, because I think it's a pretty interesting list.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the controlled fleet trials that we just kicked off, and this is weeks old at this stage, so it's brand new. The controlled fleet trials. So we started with Green Path Logistics out of Dallas, and they're known for only operating alternative fuel vehicles. So they have no diesel trucks in their operations. So they do everything from hybrid systems to straight natural gas trucks. They're also looking very closely at BEV plug-in vehicles. And then they're extremely excited about the Hypertruck ERX and have already put a commitment towards those first 200 trucks. They're in that group as well. So we've kicked it off with them. We now also have a truck up in the Northeast, up in Wegmans, running in their operations, so delivering groceries. And then we're going to expand that. And then as we close out the rest of this year, we also have some really key fleets that are in the first 200. Those include Ruan, NFI, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with their trucks and have seen them out on the highway.
Great. And then I wanted to talk about Carno, the acquisition, maybe give some color in terms of how that came about. And then in the slide deck, you did a good job of comparing it to an ICE diesel. But maybe you could talk about what are the incremental capabilities that Carno gives you versus what you're currently utilizing on the ERX with the nat gas, strictly the nat gas engine.
Yeah, so maybe just kind of share the why we saw this as a technology that was worth acquiring. So as you think about electric vehicles, most people think the area for evolution is the battery pack. And for us, that's actually not really the case. While better batteries are always a good thing, I mean, the batteries are plenty good for range extender vehicles where they stand today. So our area for evolution is how do we produce the electricity on board the truck more and more efficiently or at lower cost, right? And so when we looked at the Carno, it gives you this ability to kind of future-proof yourself because you can run on various different fuels, but then you also have an efficiency that is much, much greater than ICE engines, even better than fuel cells as we were looking at. So you're taking the best of both worlds where you've got, the ability to evolve with fuels over time, but make electricity on board the truck that rivals, kind of the efficiency levels of making electricity on the grid. So it was a great, acquisition and being able to pull that into Hyliion. And for us, as we closed out that section of the presentation, we see this as not only something that can be transformative inside vehicles, but also there's other applications as well. And I think all of us are seeing, specifically out in California, some of the grid issues that are already underway and rolling brownouts or blackouts because of just not having enough electricity to supply. And as we put more electric vehicles out there, the problem's just going to get worse.
Okay. And then your presentation did go over it with the comparison drive for trucks utilizing alternative trucks utilizing different fuels, but maybe just give a little bit more background on the current infrastructure for nat gas, renewable nat gas refueling stations in the US as a whole. I think that's something that's maybe underappreciated by people who are not closely following, right, this portion of the market. But, talk to what the coverage looks like now. Is there a need for incremental fueling stations at this point, or are we at a point where there's maybe enough infrastructure for a more broad rollout of the types of trucks that you're planning on building?
So usually when we say to people that, there's almost 700 stations already out there that you can pull in and refuel semi trucks at on natural gas, most people are like, really? I've never seen them out there. Like, are they truly there? And yeah, they are. And the reason being is there was a push years ago in the industry to move over to natural gas. The problem at the time was there was underpowered engines, reliability issues with the engines. And so all this infrastructure is built out, but then the industry never really made that shift. There are some fleets like UPS and Amazon who have been adopting natural gas vehicles and utilizing these stations that are out there, but it hasn't become a prominent thing in the industry. So what we're doing is we're saying, well, we can overcome those hurdles of why fleets conventionally haven't adopted natural gas, right? And that really comes down to how does the vehicle perform, its drivability, reliability, and we can wipe all that out with, reduce it with moving to an electric vehicle. And so, so the stations are already there. To answer your question about are there enough? We believe there is, right? You saw that route of going from California to Texas. You were going to pass, I think it was close to 50 stations along that one route. So, so the infrastructure is plenty good to get us started. And then as vehicles become, as there are more of them out there, then we expect that people will build more stations as well.
Helpful. Then I think we have a question from the audience. Brian. Mike.
Thank you, Thomas. I have a question just on an apples to apples basis. If you were to take the cost of what you're offering, would it be up against an 11-liter truck, a 13-liter truck? What if I were to buy a 13-liter diesel truck for $120,000? is there a sticker shock right now, even even with the $40,000 tax credit, that someone who wants to try to move towards what you're offering, that they have to endure there?
Yeah, so electric vehicles, hands down, no doubt, are significantly more expensive than diesel trucks. And even including the fact that diesel trucks have seen a pretty good run up as of recent in their pricing. Electric vehicles are there's a lot more to them. The batteries, everything is more expensive, e-axles. So with that, our whole approach on this is, while it is a higher upfront cost, and we haven't shared MSRPs yet just because of all the movement in the supply markets, so we haven't put a sticker or price on it yet. But what we're seeing is, hydrogen, BEV plug-in, our solution are going to be more than diesel. But the cost of hydrogen means that when you start operating a hydrogen truck, your problem is going to get worse from a TCO standpoint. When you operate a BEV, it's going to be a more expensive vehicle, but then your cost of fuel compared to diesel is about the same. With our solution, it's a more expensive vehicle, but then we have a lower operating cost because of that low cost of natural gas, that dollar per gallon equivalent of nat gas.
Right. What's the goal if you were pitching to a fleet of when you become the better economic solution? Because this is a business to business transaction, right? They're rational buyers. Is it a 2-year payback? Is it a 4-year payback? If you are being optimistic about going to market.
So the feedback we've gotten from fleets is just put it in the same ballpark of the cost of a diesel truck over the life, and we're going to adopt it.
Okay.
So $500 million of cash and equivalents on the balance sheet. You've talked to a commercialization goal, right? Having a product in the market by the end of 2023. Does that 500 million sustain you to getting to the end of 23? And obviously, when you get the product into market, there's gonna be the process of scaling and building more volume. But just talk about and thinking about the cash burn. How far do we get with $500 million on the balance sheet from here, and the potential need for incremental capital raise?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as Thomas mentioned, we had 500 million as of last quarter. Our burn rate's been 30 to 35 million a quarter, roughly. That as we've said, we've got this plan to start commercialization and selling trucks late next year. So we'll have no problem getting through that period, and then into 2024. It'll depend on just kind of the ramp up in production and volume, working capital, and so on. But we're very well positioned, and we're confident we've got cash to also weather the current market situation where it would be difficult in this environment. But we're in great shape.
Great. And I think we're coming up on time here. I have one last quick question. Thomas, how long did it take for you to get your commercial driver's license?
I got my first permit, I think, in 15, and I did not pass. And then more recently went back at it again to try. And it was like 2 weeks of working with a couple of our drivers, and they got me ready for it. And second time was a charm.
Congratulations. Well, thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Jon, Adam, for being here. Appreciated you making the trip and being here in person. Thanks.
Thanks, man.